Order, order. I'd like to welcome everybody here today, the witnesses and members of the public. I'm pleased to see there is so much interest in this session, and I know that there are a lot more people, members of the public, waiting to get into the room. I was intending to wait until everybody had come into this room before we started our proceedings, but the movement is pretty slow, so I think we will make a start, and I know that others will come in as we progress. This is a formal meeting of the Transport Select Committee, and our session today forms part of the committee's inquiry into smaller airports. Today's session is taking place under the standing orders of the House of Commons, and that means that filming and photography are strictly prohibited. Tweeting and blogging are allowed, but I ask anybody who has any mobile devices to please would you put them to silent. It is essential during our session that the committee is able to hear from our witnesses without any interruption from the public gallery. If there is interruption, I will have to ask the doorkeepers to clear the public gallery, but I don't anticipate that will be necessary, because I'm sure everybody has come here to listen to what is being said. And you might also be interested to know that a transcript of today's session will be published online by the end of the week, so you'll be able to read exactly what has been said. Now turn to our witnesses, and I'd like to ask each witness please to give us your name and organisation for our records. I start at the end.
I'm Tony Freudman from RiverOak.
Right, thank you.
George Yarrell from RiverOak.
I'm Alistair Welsh, an Interim Director of Kent Airport Limited.
Pauline Bradley, Director, Manston Skyport.
Alan McKinnon, Interim Director, Kent Airport Limited.
Right, thank you very much. Ms Bradley, how much did Manston Skyport pay Infratil to purchase Manston Airport in November 2013?
The consideration we paid was £1.
£1?
Yes.
£1. What happened to the airport's debts? Were they factored into this at all? How were they dealt with?
The transaction that we agreed with Infratil is that although we paid £1 for the shares in the company, we in fact inherited the running costs of the business. So in effect, the day after we paid £1, we became responsible for all costs and all losses in relation to the airport.
And how much was involved?
Well, by the time we had made the decision to close the airport, the losses that were incurred at the airport were about £4.5 million.
4.5
million.
£4.5 million pounds. Were any debts written off at that stage?
Could I answer that?
Yes, Mr. McKinnon.
Prior to the acquisition of the airport by Manston Skyport, Infratil, the then owners, capitalised 55 million of intra-group loans. So they converted them from loans to share capital.
Right, thank you. Ms Bradley, the Manston Skyport written evidence, which the committee has received, states that you cut short your due diligence work before purchasing the airport. So when you took control of the airport in November 2013, was the financial situation worse than you had anticipated?
Well, when we took control of the airport at that time, we hadn't bottomed out what the expected financial loss position would be. And the reason we hadn't been able to do that is that Infratil had made it very clear to us towards the end of that year that we had a very short period of time to make a decision on Manston Airport in particular. And I think from memory they gave us 1 month to make a decision as to whether or not we proceeded with the purchase of Manston or we didn't. So we had no time under those circumstances to complete the due diligence on the forward losses at Manston. We had done quite a significant amount of work, but the real problem we had and our advisors had at that time was that the management information that was given to us when we first started to review the airport as an opportunity, and in terms of the losses that management were projecting at that time, was quite different some months down the line because the trading performance of the airport had deteriorated. So to give you an example...
So let me go back to the question I'm putting to you. Was the financial situation worse than you anticipated?
Yes.
It was. Do you think that Infratil maximised profitability at Manston? Could they have done it better?
Certainly a number of conversations that we had early on in the process, parties close to the situation at Manston had confided in us that they had some concerns that Manston had suffered as a result of the remote ownership and the remote management of the previous owner, Infratil, who was based in New Zealand. And as a result of that, there was a belief that opportunities to grow the business at Manston had been missed.
Did you think that they had an effective business plan?
I don't think I could fully answer the question today, just simply because it's a long time since we looked at
Oh,
that
but
business
surely,
plan.
I mean, that can't be the case, can it? This was a purchase of a very important asset, and I'm asking you a question of, did you think that the operators had an effective business plan? Now, it's not about remembering, is it? Did you think that or didn't you?
We believed that the strategy that the operators had was the correct strategy in terms of trying to grow the revenue at Manston. But I think what I was trying to explain was that anecdotally, although they had a strategy to try and enhance the revenue, they didn't have enough of a presence on the ground to be able to maximise opportunities to do that.
Your written evidence, if I can go back to that again, also refers to what you call a highly regarded chartered accountant who had worked on numerous turnaround strategies and an industry professional with extensive aviation experience. Was that a reference to Mr. McKinnon and Mr. Welch?
Yes, it was.
It was. Mr. Welch, you looking at your track record, you do have a great deal of experience in the aviation industry, but did you genuinely believe that the Airports Commission would recommend no new runway construction in the southeast, and that BA would shift its cargo operation to Manston and Ryanair would base itself at Manston? Given the knowledge you had of the aviation sector, did you seriously believe those things?
I think that there are three different questions you ask there. In terms of the Airports Commission, ultimately I think it'll be very interesting to see what does happen. Their initial findings, I think, surprised a number. I think there is...
No, Mr. Watt, I'm not asking you for a commentary on the findings. What I'm asking is, did you genuinely believe at that early time that the Commission was likely to recommend no expansion at major airports in the southeast? Did you really believe that was likely?
We believe there was certainly a possibility that no incremental runways in the southeast could be a recommendation, yes.
Do you know anybody else who thought that?
Many, yes.
Really? Do you think that BA was going to shift its cargo operation to Manston? What led you to think that?
Well, the executive team at Manston previously had been very close to getting British Airways to migrate their cargo operation from Stansted, and they went to main board and it stayed at Stansted at that point, and it was up for renewal or review in early of 2014, and the executive team at the airport were confident that they had a very good chance of securing it for Manston.
And that Ryanair was going to base itself at Manston?
I think it's fair to say that there were, and perhaps Mr. Bradley can answer that better than me, because there were conversations before purchase that took place with Michael O'Leary, but perhaps you could answer that if that's okay.
Ms. Bradley, was that a likely proposition?
I believe at the time we made the decision to acquire the airport, that was a likely outcome. If I can just explain, myself and Anne Gloag met twice with Michael O'Leary and Michael Crowley at Ryanair to try and persuade them to consider Manston as a base, and perhaps to use Manston to operate some of the what's called sunshine flights to the southern parts of Europe. I have to say that when we first went to see them, they hadn't heard very much about Manston, in fact, if anything at all, and that reinforced our belief that perhaps Infratil were just too remote to actually capture opportunities here. However, they did consider Manston. They sent someone down to have a look at it. I think Tony actually was perhaps involved at that stage. And they came back with a very positive review at that stage for Ryanair. And that led to Michael O'Leary allowing us access to his senior routes planner to begin to discuss what those routes would be, how many times a week they would go, what the passenger numbers would be. And at the time we made the decision to acquire the airport, we were talking to Ryanair on, I think, 5 routes that would initially have brought an additional 85,000 passengers to Manston. And by 2019, that would have increased to 300,000. So there was a real credible opportunity to do business with Ryanair at that time.
Let me go to what happened about the purchase and disposal of Manston. You announced the closure of the airport in March 2014, less than 4 months after the purchase. When was the decision to close taken, or your intention to close?
The intention to close the airport was as a result of the review that the interim executives had carried out. They were asked to report.
When?
Well, they reported to the shareholders at the end of February as to what the options were for the airport going forward.
So how long was that after the airport was purchased?
4 months.
4 months. It sounds very. Don't you think it sounds a little strange after? Your confidence, the way that you put it to us today with Mr. Welch's comments, that all these very positive things were going to happen within 4 months, the decision to close it.
Well, the reason for that was a number of things happened in a very short period of time. Probably the most serious for Manston was that Ryanair, by the beginning of 2014 and after 2 profits warnings, had reviewed their operational strategy and came to the conclusion that airports like Manston were exactly not what they wanted in terms of their business going forward. And therefore, as a result of that, Ryanair withdrew from our discussions, and that wasn't something we could have foreseen at the time. So Ryanair, in effect, pulled out. Obviously, the BA cargo that you referred to, and BA changed their own strategy in relation to cargo. Some of the cargo operators that we had spoken to in terms of bringing business to Manston, they were affected by things such as the no night flights, and therefore we couldn't actually attract business for part of that reason. And the whole strategy around cargo in terms of the aviation industry was under review, and most cargo was being carried in the belly of planes. So the main areas we identified early on to improve the revenue at Manston, to give us a chance of turning it around within a very short period of time, those areas no longer existed.
So within 4 months, you went from seeing this as a place where there could be major developments with some confidence to deciding to have to close it. Am I correct in saying that? And the airport closed on the 15th of May 2014. When did you sell off the assets, such as the emergency equipment and the runway lighting? When were they sold off?
I think probably...
Who can answer that one?
July, August.
I think, so if I can take that.
Yes, Mr. Welch.
Following the closure, there was, and I think key piece really to set out is, it's what we would call an orderly closure, by which we mean a solvent closure, so creditors were paid, staff were made redundant and paid obviously by the company, and as part of that, what then followed was the mechanical assets, so things with wheels and so on were sold around about 3 or 4 months after that, and then some of the other items were sold beyond that.
So just could you clarify for me, when were the aviation assets, such as emergency equipment and runway lighting, sold off?
I don't think the runway lighting has actually been sold.
Has it been sold?
But certainly it was available for sale. I don't think it has value, to be honest, but there was a process of sale which ran until September, October, I believe, last year, roughly.
Yeah, but I want to know when these particular pieces of equipment were sold off. When was the emergency equipment sold off?
If it's helpful, might I suggest that we could write to you with a schedule breaking that down so we can be correct.
Emergency equipment, runway lighting. I want to know when those were sold off. We've heard that RiverOak attempted to purchase the airport in April 2014 following the closure announcement. How much did they offer?
I can answer that. The original offer from RiverOak was a verbal offer, and it was made to myself and Anne Gloag. The original offer was to give us our money back. And that's the quote.
How much was offered?
The offers ranged from the initial offer of giving us back our money. There was then a verbal
So
offer.
how much would that be?
My interpretation of that at the time was they were going to pay us the £1 that we had in fact paid Infratil. The offer was increased to, I think, around 2.5 million verbally, and then offers after that started to come in writing.
RiverOak, who would like to comment on that?
£6 million, £5 million, £6 million, and ultimately £7 million in the space of 2 or 3 weeks. In writing.
That was in writing. So Bradley, this is something very different. How can there be such a discrepancy?
I don't think it is different. The original conversations with RiverOak, when they came up to visit Anne Gloag in Scotland and myself, and in fact I think Tony Freudman was actually present at that meeting, the offers were made verbally. So there was a verbal offer made that day, which was to give us our money back. When that was rejected, the offer was increased at the same meeting to around 2 or 2.5 million, I don't remember which. That meeting then ended, and Mr Freudman and Niall Lawler and another gentleman left, and the same day we had a telephone conversation to increase the offer, which I believe was to either £3 or £4 million. When the offers started to come in writing, then Mr Yarrell is correct that we had written offers of 5, 6 and 7
So
million.
the answer to my question is that you had an offer of, what was it? How many million?
The initial offer?
No,
made
not.
by-
I'm asking what the offer was from RiverOak.
The
What
offer
did they
ranged.
offer
The
you?
offer ranged from £1 to 7 million.
RiverOak, have you got evidence of what offers you made?
Yes, they're in writing. We have the copies of the letters if you would like
Yeah.
them.
And the amount of the offer that you made?
The highest offer
The
was
highest.
£7 million. We were rejected at $4 million. We were rejected at $5 million, and we ultimately offered $7, which we were told was the asking price.
Right. Ms Bradley, do you accept that you're disputing what RiverOak are saying they offered you and that you rejected?
I certainly don't agree that the offer does. I do agree that the asking price was £7 million. I don't agree that that was the offer that we received from RiverOak. The offer we received was a highly conditional offer, and one of those conditions is that RiverOak would actually take ownership of the £2 million that sat in our bank account. So that was never a £7 million offer.
Would it be the case that you were aware at that point that the land was worth a great deal more as a development opportunity than it was as an airport? And that might have affected your decision?
I'm not aware that we actually thought about it in those terms, but the decision we took was not affected by what we thought the land might ultimately have been worth. The decision we took around RiverOak was really for 2 reasons. The first reason was that we entered into discussions with RiverOak in good faith. In truth, we saw them as being, out of all the parties that we had been introduced to as buyers of the airport, we certainly saw RiverOak as being someone who at that stage appeared a credible buyer for the airport, and we were optimistic in our early discussions with them. But one of the things we asked very early on of RiverOak, before we really got into much of a debate around price at all, was that any communication between us was kept private and confidential, just until we agreed the deal. And at that point, we had no issue with anyone, in the public domain being aware of it. But we had just come through a very difficult experience with a previous cash buyer that apparently was going to buy the airport, pay the money, and do the deal in a very short period of time. We were going through a consultation process with staff at that time, and it was extremely difficult for them and extremely difficult for the interim team because their hopes were raised and then this cash buyer did not materialise. So we explained all of that to RiverOak and said, look, it's really important to us that we have this private and confidential arrangement, after which we've got no issue. And unfortunately, within a short period of time, written communication from RiverOak to ourselves started to appear in the public domain. And in fact, we heard twice from our own staff at Manston that an offer was coming from RiverOak. On one occasion, they could tell us that it was a knockout offer. We had other people calling our office from the media in Thanet to tell us that another offer was coming, that they had seen an offer. So in effect, something we'd asked to stay private and confidential, third parties were actually aware of these offers and in some cases had seen these offers before we did. So we just lost trust in RiverOak. It was a complete breach.
But losing trust is very different from disputing the fact whether there was or there wasn't an offer. Let me, Ms Bradley, let me take you back to the written evidence that we've received from you, and that includes the following sentence. In September 2014, Manston Skyport sold the site to regeneration specialists. Now, is that a reference to Mr Cartner and Mr Musgrave?
Yes, it is.
It is. So you sold the site for them, so they're the current owners of the airport, are they?
They are. They're the majority.
They're the current owners of the airport. Did Manston Skyport Limited maintain an interest in the former Manston Airport?
Yes, they did.
It did. So who owns it then? Mr Cartner and Musgrave are the owners. Manston Skyport, you agree, retains an interest. Can you tell us the nature of that interest?
The majority of the share capital of that business, as in 80% of the share capital of that business, is owned by Mr Musgrave and Mr Carter. So we have a minority interest in the business going forward.
So they own 80% of it, do
That's
they?
correct.
Are you, Miss Bradley, a director of a company called Lothian Shelf 718?
I believe I am, yes.
You believe you are? Yes. The answer is yes. What assets does Lothian Shelf 718 hold the title to?
Lothian Shelf 718 must own its 20% shareholder in the joint venture. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be helpful, I'm just not entirely sure.
You don't know?
Oh, sorry, Mr McKinnon's reminding me 718 owns.
You don't know?
My colleague,
Well,
McKinnon.
Mr McKinnon, what light can you shed on this?
Lothian Self 718 is the JV company and owns the site.
It owns the whole of the site, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes, Miss Bradley, you've given me a different answer. It owns the whole of the site. Therefore, it is accurate to state that Manston Skyport sold the site to the regeneration specialists who you've named. Mr. Cartner and Mr. Musgrave, you said it sold the site to them. We now find that the company Lothian Shelf 718, which you were a director of, owns the site. So the first statement isn't accurate, is it?
No, Lothian Shelf 718 is the joint venture company. So Mr Carter and Mr Musgrave own 80% of Lothian Shelf and we own the other 20%. So that is the joint venture company.
Is there a charge secured against the assets of Lothian Shelf 718?
Yes, there is. In favour of Manston Sky, in favour of Kent Facilities Limited. There is a charge, I believe, registered against Lothian Shelf 718 Limited in favour of Kent Facilities Limited, which owned the site.
Yeah, does that charge relate to a loan of £7 million from Kent Facilities Limited?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms Bradley doesn't seem to know. Where does that £7 million come from?
Sorry, where does it come from?
Yeah.
It is an amount secured against the site. And
where from? Where's the money come from?
It's securing money that has not yet been paid.
Where does it come from? Where does £7 million come from? Well, no one. Can you answer? Either of you answer that?
Sorry?
Can either of you answer that question? Where does that £7 million come from? Ms Bradley, can you tell me?
Sorry, forgive me. I think to give you an accurate answer, the best thing is that we actually write to you fully about what the £7 million is.
Well, according to documents that we have, the answer to that is Anne Globe. You're not aware of that?
As I say, I think the best thing is that I research it and write to you. I don't want to give you an answer that could be incorrect.
Is a share of the profits from Lothian Shelf 718 directed to a company called Highland and Universal Investments under the terms of a joint venture agreement?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Who is the director and owner of Highland and Universal Investments?
I believe the owner is Anne Gloag.
Anne Gloag, that's correct.
I don't know who the directors are.
The owner is Anne Gloag.
Yeah.
Has Anne Gloag retained a substantial stake in and financial control of the former Manston Airport site?
The control of the site, whether it's financially or indeed in any other way, lies with Mr Musgrave and Mr Cartner. We have obviously made the decision to sell it to them based on their experience in the area, and therefore they are very much involved in the regeneration.
Well, you're talking about involved in, that is a completely separate question. That's not what I put to you, and I'm going to put the question to you again. Has Anne Gloag retained a substantial stake in and financial control of the former Manston Airport site?
She has a stake in the business. She has no financial control of the business.
Is it not correct that Anne Gloag has financial control through the charge secured against the assets of Lothian Shelt 718, and that a share of the profits is directed to her under the joint venture agreement? Is that not correct?
I don't think that necessarily means that she has financial control. I think anyone who has a charge over a business, if there's a breach of the conditions of the charge, then you'll exercise your charge, but I don't think that means you've got financial control of a business. You've secured an interest you have with a charge.
Well, how would you describe Anne Gloag's connection with this site in view of the facts which I've read out and some of which you agreed with?
Her connection with the site is that she retains an interest in the site, and that she has secured her interest in the site with some form of fixed charge. That is her interest in the site.
Wouldn't you think that, given the facts I put to you, all of which are well documented and have been researched by the House of Commons Library, wouldn't you think it is deliberately misleading this committee and the public into thinking that Manston Airport had been sold to Mr Cartner and Mr Musgrave? Wouldn't you think that was a misleading thing to put forward in view of the facts I've put to you and the documentation we have?
I don't think we've ever tried to say that we don't have a retained interest in Manston going forward. I think that was actually part of the statement that was made at the time. So we have always stated that we have retained an interest in Manston Airport. In terms of the supplemental questions to do with the charge, and whether in some way having that charge influences the way that business goes forward, is something that I would have to come back to you and clarify. But I don't believe that the presence of a charge would mean that Anne Gloag had any financial control or other type of control of the business.
Or financial interest?
She would have a financial interest.
A significant financial interest?
If the regeneration was obviously to be successful and profits would be made, then yes, she would have a significant financial interest.
Ms Smith.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to RiverOak, Mr Freeman and Mr Yale. Could you describe to us what previous experience RiverOak has in the aviation industry?
RiverOak, as a company which is based in Stamford, Connecticut, has not done an aviation property as RiverOak, an aviation project. However, Mr. Freudman, who's now a partner with RiverOak, and Mr. Lawler, who's in the room and is a partner with RiverOak, have extensive aviation experience, both operationally and financially.
Just specifically picking up Mr. Freudman's role as you've offered it, Mr. Freudman, you were the MD of Manston Airport between 1997 and 2005. The airport ended up in liquidation. What would have been your intentions to do a better job this time?
I had departed long before the liquidation, and without engaging too much in a history lesson, the then owners of the then company decided to back the company on a low-cost carrier called EUJet. Those of us whose advice were ignored departed the company, and by the time the company went into administration in July 2005, I was long gone. And during my time, the airport was successfully transferred from military use to a civilian operation and was building up its cargo business very successfully.
From RiverOak's perspective, what then is the broad nature of your business, and in placing your offer on Manston, did you expect to be able to do with this site?
You know, I didn't hear the middle verb that you used there. What was the something of the? So if you wouldn't mind.
What is the nature of your business, and what did you expect to be able to do with this site?
So our story is a relatively simple one. We took a fresh look at this and didn't see a passenger airport as the stabilizing event for that airport. We saw a cargo business that we felt we could grow. We reached out to a number of the already existing carriers, and we reached out to a number of new carriers and got a pretty strong response for what those carriers would be willing to do were we able to reopen the airport. It ended up that we could make the airport work on 22 flights a week, which we just didn't think was so hard to make happen.
And what is then the nature of your business? So one of the items that's obvious from your website is that your interest is more principally in property development.
We're not property developers, actually. We're investors. So we have a business back in the States that finds property developers who need cash, and we form joint ventures with them, but we don't build and operate the real estate. So we're really an asset manager. We have $350 million of different kinds of assets under management. We've executed 50 deals and never failed to execute. And to go back to your prior question, the other thing that came along quickly at Manston was the ability to run a repair, maintenance, and ultimately tear down facility, which we came to understand is a highly growing field. As more and more planes go in the air and less countries are willing to have them parked in the desert, they need to be carefully broken down, reparted, and turned into either recycling or spare parts. So that became a second plank that we based our underwriting of the airport on as well.
And did you believe that was going to be profitable?
I do believe it will be profitable. We're talking, we've had extensive talks and tours with an original equipment manufacturer, so an OEM of airplanes, who's very interested in this business, doesn't want to own the business, but wants to be in the business. So I believe that is going to be a profitable business, whether it's at Manston or elsewhere in the short run, because there's too many planes in the air and they have to come out of service at some point. So, you know, a plane's going to run out of its useful life somewhere between 12, 13, and 20 years. And it's no longer feasible to just keep parking them somewhere in the sand.
And did you have evidence that that model would have been profitable when you were making the 4, 5, and 7 offer?
No, we didn't. We didn't base our offer on that, and we didn't need to. We knew that that was a secondary plank, so we based our offer on what we knew or felt we knew we could do very simply in the cargo business. There's a lot of reasons why cargo works in Manston, not the least of which is the enormous amount of apron space, the ability to get service right onto the airfield instead of what a cargo carrier has to do at Stansted or Heathrow. And so, you know, we found we could get goods into London faster from Manston than it can be done from Heathrow.
So would it be your view that Manston remains a viable site for such a venture?
Completely. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and there's a part of me that says, you know, just a guy from Massachusetts that's in Parliament today, and that doesn't happen very often. But I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think we could make money with it. So that's why I'm here.
And have you ever provided such advice at any time to Skyport or any of the other ventures that we've named today?
Have we provided advice to them?
Have you formulated your view that it is possible to run Manston profitably on a business model that includes repair and takedown? Have you at any time formulated that into a conversation that could be construed as advice with any of the people named today?
I don't believe we talked to them directly about it.
Thank you.
We did? I'm sorry. If we did, I wasn't there.
I turned my head at just the one point. Whoever it was that said we did, would you please expand on that? Chair.
No.
Forgive me, Chair, I thought it was a member.
Sorry.
I'll hand back to you.
Mr. Harris.
Ms. Bradley, it's obviously an incredibly complicated financial situation you're experienced in these matters, but when Infratil purchased the airport for 17 million in 2005 and then offered to sell it to you 8 years later for £1, were there any alarm bells ringing at that point?
Well, the original offer on the table we made with Infratil was actually £8 million, but when we had gone through the financial due diligence in particular, and you could see the scale of the losses, that was the main reason. Sorry, I should explain. It was actually part of a larger transaction at that stage that involved Prestwick Airport, and that £8 million offer was for both of these airports. But because we couldn't get a handle on the losses, we had the management losses, we had updated trading, and there was quite a difference between the two, and we simply couldn't get comfortable with what the actual level of losses might be. So we withdrew from the Prestwick Airport side of things, and we asked Infratil if we could proceed to buy Manston, and the price ticket at that stage was £1. The reason we didn't have alarm bells ringing was what I alluded to earlier. So many people on the ground at Manston had advised us that the reason the business underperformed is that it just hadn't been managed from a revenue enhancement perspective, and that was the opportunity that we saw, and that's why we went to Ryanair. That's why we actually approached some of the other cargo operators. That's why we went to the local authority and to Kent County Council to see what support we could get to actually give Manston the best chance to begin to turn around. So, yeah, there are alarm bells to a point, but we believed in what we'd heard at that time, and to be honest, had Ryanair not had the situation they found themselves in at the beginning of the year, I think Manston would have had a good chance to turn around.
So from your perspective back in 2013, looking at the history of Manston, having done all your due diligence, you were absolutely 100% certain, without any kind of doubt, serious doubt, that it would be a viable airport in the long term.
When we completed the purchase, we hadn't finished the due diligence, and that was part of the problem, because Infratil, by that stage, having thought they were going to get an £8 million price for two airports, found themselves with a potential purchaser that didn't want to buy one and was only going to pay £1 for the second airport.
You presumably have followed the coverage of this controversy, perhaps closer than others have. Can you understand why a lot of people from the outside are looking at this and thinking there's something very fishy here?
I can understand, first of all, that there's a lot of emotion around Manston. I understand that there is a history of Manston, and that there's a lot of people that are very sad that the airport finally closed after such a long.
No, sorry, that's not what I meant. What I mean is, a lot of money is involved in this, and a lot of people are about to get very, very wealthy on the back of a £1 purchase. Do you understand why people are looking at and thinking that there has been a very dubious financial sleight of hand here?
Yeah, I mean, I think if your headline is, well, they've bought this airport for £1, I can understand that some people might think, well, there's a fortune to be made in this. But I think the reality is, as I said earlier, by the time we took the decision to close the airport, the losses that had been racked up in the period that we had owned it were 4.5 million. This was an airport that was losing between £10,000 and £12,000 a day. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the...
And for how long had those losses been endured, do you think, before the purchase? I mean, presumably, you know, it was making losses in the years before you purchased it. So by the time you purchased it, it must have lost hundreds of millions? I mean,
I don't think it was in the hundreds of millions. I believe the overall loss position to Infratil, including the 17.5 million that they paid for it, was about 55 million. You
say that you were slightly dismissive of the allegation that a lot of people are going to make a lot of money out of this. Mrs. Glode's going to make quite a lot of money, isn't she?
If it's successful, she would, yeah.
Are you personally?
No.
There's no bonus for you?
I have none.
Mr. Welch, you'll understand as members of the Select Committee are constantly targeted by airports and air industry organisations concerned about the Davis Commission, and we've been involved in a lot of the debate as it's gone over the years. I got involved in it back in 2008, so I've paid very close attention to that debate. And I'm delighted that you're here, because you're the first person I've met that thinks there's any chance that the Davis Commission will recommend that there's no new airports anywhere in the South East. Do you still expect that to happen when they make their conclusion? Will you be surprised if the Airport Commission do actually recommend new runways anywhere in the South East? Will you be run down Whitehall naked or something?
No.
That's an idea.
I think that's not an idea I pursue, certainly. Okay. But no, seriously, at the time of purchase, which I think there's a question earlier from the chair, the point was there a possibility that Davis would recommend actually no more runways and make best use of current airports? And that was a possibility, and it was a possibility.
On a percentage terms, how likely do you think that would have been? Between 5 and 10%? Less?
No, I think higher than that, because his original remit was very, very broad. He then, and Manston put in very strong representations before the purchase to him, because the consultation period, I'm sure you're aware, was before purchase, to the effect that there was plenty of capacity in the southeast, was the contention from Manston, and that actually Manston had a role to play and potentially could even be that runway that London needed. And Davis considered it clearly very carefully and said, no, that's not what I'm going to pursue. And he came back and said he will pursue a further runway, as you know, either at Heathrow or Gatwick. And so to your question, do I think he'd recommend, having said there should be one at either Heathrow or Gatwick, do I think he'd recommend none? No, I don't. I think he will recommend one.
Just last, Ms. Bradley, Manston Skyport never seriously intended to run Manston Airport, did they?
Manston Skyport did intend to run Manston as an airport, and that was why we had the conversations we did early on to try in particular to improve the passenger numbers through a volume player like Ryanair. And that's why we spent a lot of time and a lot of money in trying to look at how we could turn Manston around. And we also looked, for example...
Well, not a lot of time, really, though. But maybe a lot of money, but a few weeks.
Sorry, I'm referring to the time even before the purchase. We did a lot of this work in the months leading up to the purchase. So one of the other things we did is we tried to look at the possibility of putting a new terminal building into Manston, because if your business plan relies on low-cost carriers, I think, as I'm sure you'll know, the only way you'll make money from a low-cost carrier really is to actually offer services within the terminal building and also through the car parking. So we also looked at actually building a new terminal building. We actually had it costed, and one of the reasons we went to see Kent County Council was to see that if we got to that stage, would there be some public support to do that. So there was a very clear intent when we bought the airport to run that airport as an aviation operation. We knew that there would be problems and challenges. We understood the risks, and I made the decision to acquire it on that basis.
But then a few weeks later, you changed your mind?
A few months later, largely because of the Ryanair situation, we changed our mind.
And RiverOak, either Mr. Yarrell or Mr. Freudman, could you tell us why the District Council declined your offer to act as an indemnity partner in the CPO?
Well, I can tell you why they said they did that. You're going to hear that we don't have any money, that somehow in their qualifications that we came up short on dollars. We have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just pursuing the deals in the 6 months that we've been looking at it, and we've raised plenty of money and put in our own to become a CPO indemnity partner with the district council. When our offers were rejected to buy the airport, we had to take a step back. That step back included going to Rag Graham and understanding what the CPO process was about, going to Lord Panic and getting a read on why our bid as a CPO for the airport would or wouldn't hold water. And we also consulted with a barrister named James Marici, all at great expense, and it took time. So we did all that research, offered to share that research, could never get a taker from the council to look at that research or...
But you did your research, but did you comply with all of their diligence-related requests?
No. In a short answer, we didn't, and that was because we felt that the requests they were making weren't useful for the exercise we were in. And so we tried to explain that, and we couldn't get there. And now I know we're an American company, we're not on a British website, and meaning we're not in the company's house, and we're a private equity company, so we're not easy necessarily to understand. But we went to some pretty great lengths to show who we were, what we had, what our financial wherewithal was, but it didn't fit into the box we were trying to be put into.
Did you propose that RiverOak, or a subsidiary of RiverOak, would act as the indemnity partner?
Yes, yes, and presented a...
Is that subsidiary registered in the state of Delaware?
Yes, and we told the council that we knew we would be incorporating in the UK, that the license holder would always have to be a UK company, and went as far as to ask the council how much money they would like us to deposit onshore. And at that point, we're told that they were no longer taking information and that they were moving towards a decision.
So, I mean, were you prepared to commit to purchasing Manston at the end of the CPO process and running it as an airport?
Yes.
You were prepared to commit to that?
Yes.
You would do that. And did you propose releasing funds to Thanet District Council in a series of payments rather than as one sum?
I'm sorry, was the question, did we agree to release funds to them?
To release funds to the council as a series of payments?
Chair, we provided a comprehensive heads of terms on what a CPO indemnity partnership...
Yeah, but answer the question, did you propose a series of payments to the council rather than one payment?
No, a series of payments. It was always going to be a series of payments. That's how the CPO would work.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone.
You're welcome.
Answering questions. We'll move on. Good afternoon and welcome to the Transport Select Committee. Could you give us your name and organisation, please? Let's start at the end here.
Paul Cook, Director of Corporate Resources, Thanet District Council.
Right, thank you.
Madeline Homer, Acting Chief Executive, Thanet District Council.
Thank you.
Iris Johnston, Leader of Thanet District Council.
Thank you.
Roger Gale, Member of Parliament for North Thanet, which includes the Manston site.
Thank you very much.
Paul Carter, Leader of Kent County Council.
David Smith, Director for Economic Development at Kent County Council.
Right. Thank you. I'd like to ask all of you whether you were aware that Manston Skyport and Globe had maintained an interest in Manston. You've heard the previous session, you've heard the information that came from that. I'd like to ask each of you if you knew about that. Mr. Cook, were you aware of that?
I was aware that a majority interest had been acquired by the new owners, therefore that some interest had been retained.
And you knew who had retained it?
Yes.
So when you were listening to the previous session in relation to retention of interest in Manston, specifically in relation to Anglo and Manston Skyport, was any of that new to you?
I knew that only a majority interest had been disposed of, so I didn't know all the exact details, but I understood the overall situation.
Ms. Homer, what was your information?
My understanding was that the majority interest had been sold to Chris Musgrave and Trevor Carner, but that Anglo had retained a 20% interest in the joint venture company. That was my understanding.
Councillor Johnson, what was your information?
Thank you. On the 23rd of September, Mrs. Bradley phoned me at 8 o'clock in the morning to tell me that the person I was seeing that morning would be the people who were the new owners of Manston. And I actually had an appointment in my diary for 8:15 with Chris Musgrave. And this would appear to have been the exciting news that Mrs. Gloag had told me the summer was coming. I then fairly quickly realised that 80% was with Mr. Musgrave and Mr. Cartner, and 20% was held by others that Mrs. Gloag would have been connected with, and Mrs. Bradley.
And did you have any further information about that?
Not particularly. I had a good meeting with Mr. Musgrave, and it became clearer to me at that meeting the arrangements. But it was a very brief meeting. I think he was meeting with, discussing with the MPs and others the breakdown as well. But for me, it was the exciting news that there were going to be some new owners sometime in the autumn, and that was it.
And after listening to the exchanges in the session that's now just concluded, the part of the session that's concluded, did you feel that you'd been misled in any way?
I don't know if I was misled, but I hadn't quite grasped the extent of Mrs. Gloag's interest until some time ago, when I was alerted to the fact that Mrs. Gloag's interest was more than just the 20%.
Right. Thank you. Sir Roger, what was your understanding of this in relation to Mrs. Gloag's continued involvement?
When I was told that Cartner and Musgrave had acquired an interest in the site, I made it my business to find out the structure of the companies behind it. It became apparent to me that in no meaningful sense did Cartner and Musgrave own 80% of anything at all connected with Manston, other than possibly a promise. I said that publicly on BBC Radio Kent. I received a complaint from Cartner and Musgrave indicating that I'd misrepresented their position and asking me to withdraw. So I wrote back to them and said that I'd be grateful if they could confirm that they did in fact own the unencumbered freehold of 80% of Manston, including the Northern Grass site. I have yet to receive a reply.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, what was your understanding of the position?
Yeah, I mean, from the moment the sale was announced, I've always been aware that Anne Cloag had retained a 20% interest in the new joint venture company. The details of how the new joint venture company was funded, I've little information on. Obviously, from the discussions earlier, that Anne Cloag is still got quite a lot of money involved through her charge in this company to hopefully make interesting things happen at Manston Airport.
And does what you've heard today disturb you in any way?
No.
No, there was nothing there. Mr. Smith, could you tell us if you've heard anything new today in relation to knowledge about Anglo's and continued involvement?
No, I haven't, Madam Chairman. I would be interested to see the additional evidence that Ms Bradley has promised about the structure of the current ownership, but it is my understanding supported by a letter from Mr Cartner and Mr Musgrave's solicitors explaining that in economic terms they have 80% ownership of the company that owns the airport and its assets.
Councillor Johnson, could you explain to us why Thanet District Council didn't proceed with a compulsory purchase order in relation to Manston?
Thank you. When we received a petition on the 10th of July asking the Council to CPO Manston, we've had some experiences and difficult experiences of CPOs, and I think the feeling was that we needed an indemnity partner that covered all our costs. I called 2 urgent meetings, one on the 17th of July and then one that was in our diary for the 31st of July to see how we could move forward. So we went out for soft market testing, and some companies came forward, including RiverOak. And of course I've known Mr Freudman for many years. I've been a councillor for 20 years, so I know Mr Freudman's background. It eventually got to a stage by the middle of October that we weren't satisfied with the information that was coming forward. It's very difficult for a company, and particularly an American company, to meet the criteria of a district council. We need to see 3 years' accounts. Our due diligence is very strong. We mustn't risk everything that our council does unless we're sure of who our partner is. And although I have respect for all of the people involved, it was very difficult for us, and although we could have made a decision in July, we extended the time to the 11th of December when we said at the present time we were not going forward with the CPO because we had not found an indemnity partner.
I mean, RiverOak have told us that they did everything that was asked of them. Are you disputing that? Are you saying that it wasn't
I think based on the officer advice and based on my own observations, I think it was difficult to get the information that we required. The very original responses, the answers weren't fully completed. They were unable to give 3 years' accounts because the company had been set up in Delaware, I believe, on the 3rd of July, so they wouldn't have had 3 year accounts for the company that we were going to have to deal with. And we had to be very cautious. If we had a difficulty and perhaps there was a repeat of the situation that Mrs Gloag landed us in, we might find that we had the same situation with RiverOak months or a couple of years down the line, and the council might have to underwrite. We also had legal advice saying about a leap of faith, and that to me was what it was going to be, a leap of faith.
Was the fact that the subsidiary was registered in Delaware a significant factor in you deciding you couldn't go along with it?
I think it probably is. I'd like people to pay tax in this country, thank you.
Well, where did you get your advice from in dealing with all of this? Did you have access to the right kind of expertise?
Absolutely. I was obviously dependent on our officers who are sitting beside me, but we also sought outside legal advice. We had considerable evidence from telephone conversations, emails, and then written advice, which I have in front of me here from Landmark. And, you know, elected members, all of us have to be mindful of the advice we're given. Whatever our personal views are, we have to listen and to take regard of it. And I have that advice in front of me, and it's very clear. We had to think of the rights of the owners, and I'm now finding out more about the owners today. But we also had to meet certain tests for a CPO, and we weren't totally satisfied. With regret, and at the present time, we were not satisfied with what RiverOak, after many months of asking for full information. We saw that there was $1.6 million in an account somewhere in America. I didn't see the bank statement, and we were looking for an escrow account in this country with the council and the indemnity partner having joint rights over. But we weren't at that stage by several months later to the 11th of December.
The summary.
How much would you estimate that this cost the taxpayers of Thanet so far in the advice you've received, extra advice?
We had commissioned a report from Falcon, who are a reputable company. Was that £26,000?
May I?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Yes,
that
9.
question?
Yeah.
The total cost that Thanet District Council has spent on seeking advice on this matter is £26,000.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, do you think that Mr Cartner and Mr Musgrave are good news in relation to Manston Airport?
Well, I live in hope, madam.
Councillor Carter, could you explain your position to us? The County Council has a resolution supporting the continuation of an airport at Manston, but you seem to have made statements welcoming what's called mixed development on the site. Could you clarify what your view is and the view of the council is?
Yeah, I mean, over the last 15, 16 years when the airport's been under private ownership, we've done all we could at Kent County Council to support the development of a thriving airport at Manston. And as always already been referred to this afternoon, the amount of private sector losses in those 16 years has been exceedingly high. From Wiggins going into liquidation to EU Jet going spectacularly bust as part of that, and Infratil accruing losses of about £55 million during their ownership. We, Kent County Council, have done all we can to support Infratil under my leadership for nearly 10 years. Every time the main board came over from New Zealand, we had discussions about how we could help and support them still further. The road connectivity, the rail connectivity has been dramatically improved, so the accessibility to the airport is good. A new Manston Parkway station is proposed and is part of our LGF Round 1 success in getting that station where high-speed 1 trains will bring Thanet and Manston closer to London. We've made enormous endeavours to help and support more broadly the East Kent economy. You asked me the question if I'd heard anything this afternoon that concerned me, and my answer was no, because Messrs Musgrave and Cartner have a very successful track record in developing commercial parks, are the owners of Discovery Park just down the road where Pfizer's withdrew some 4 years ago, almost exactly, took on massive financial risk and have turned it into the most phenomenal success, now employing 2,200 jobs when Pfizer's, when they made the phone call to David Willits and David Willits to myself, asking me to lead a task force, were threatening their total withdrawal from Sandwich and the demolition bull to go into that site within 12 months had we not had a good rescue plan. And we're enormously grateful for the support and aid we got from national government to turn that into a phenomenal success. They've done the same in the northeast of England at an old Samsung site that closed down in 2005, which now supports again over 2,000 jobs, and in a partnership with an ex-coalfield site in Sheffield, turned that into a dramatic success. Very challenging commercial sites which have been turned round by the expertise of those two partners.
Councillor Carter, have you seen the detailed proposals from Mr Cartner and Mr Musgrave?
I did have a meeting with them in my office a week, 10 days ago, when they discussed the evolution of their master plan, which will, I don't think there's any secrets, try and maximise advanced manufacturing on that site. Indeed, they have one or two prospective tenants that would like to be on the airport site.
What about housing? How much of it's for housing?
Well, I mean, there is talk of some housing, but predominantly it will be a commercial development, is what they tell me. I can only repeat what came out of that conversation with both of those partners, where it will be led by advanced manufacturing, exactly the sort of jobs we want to create.
What exactly did you see? I'd just like to be clear what you saw. You had a discussion with them, and what did they show you?
Well, they've got they showed me nothing. We talked about their plan. We had a discussion with David Smith, the Director of Economic Development, about their evolving ideas for the master plan, which will eventually be submitted to Thanet District Council, and that is in its evolution. What I was told was that it will be predominantly commercially led. Advanced manufacturing will be high on the list, and they have already potentially secured some very interesting occupiers in advanced manufacturing, where they believe 550 jobs could be secured there, subject to planning, very quickly, which is enormously exciting when the airport has only succeeded previously to employ 144 jobs, many of those part-time jobs. So am I excited about the future? Yes, I am, based on the track record of Mr. Cartner and Mr. Musgrave in their business ventures elsewhere in this country.
Mr. Harris.
First of all, welcome back to the Transport Committee. You seem to have a better attendance record here than I do. In July last year, you voted with your colleagues for a motion which expresses disappointment at the closure of the airport and a commitment to work with Thanet District Council to support proposals to retain Manston as an airport. 2 months later, you were being very, very enthusiastic about the new regime, as you have been today, and that's perfectly acceptable. But did something change in those 2 months? It's a very short period of time where you went from voting unanimously to support the airport and then suddenly banging on about the fantastic track record of the new owners and creating non-airport jobs.
Yes, well, the motion that was supported unanimously by the County Council said, would we be prepared to support Thanet District Council in a CPO process at Manston, provided a viable airport, a thriving airport, could be delivered at Manston. And it was caveated by that. So the principle of supporting the retention of aviation at Manston Airport was there and unanimously agreed to by the Council. But in my speech, which there are records of, were caveated by the fact that, provided there was a viable business proposition to retain aviation growth at Manston Airport, that really did stack up. We asked Thanet District Council to submit any propositions that came their way within the time lines that were set, and nothing arrived at Kent County Council at all. So we have never seen a developed business plan from RiverOak to develop Manston Airport as a viable going concern majoring on aviation.
I may have, the problem may be, I don't know if I've got the full resolution of the Council here. If you say it was caveated, I certainly don't have any caveats. I have the motion, if you don't mind, I'll read the whole thing that I've got. It says that Kent County Council supports the actions taken so far by Thanet District Council to retain Manston as a regional airport. We recognise the value that the regional airport brings to East Kent and are disappointed at its closure. Kent County Council will explore with Thanet District Council ways in which it can support proposals to retain Manston as an airport. So there was more to the motion than that. Have I only got an edited version?
Yeah, I mean, that was the substantive motion.
So
as I said when I asked
the
Conservative group on the County Council to support it, provided that we had a viable business plan for aviation retention at Manston, and was positive for growth in the East Kent economy. And I have no evidence that any proposition has come forward that is worthy of a CPO process that does that. And we've worked very closely with Thanet District Council, asked for the submissions that were made by interested parties that may want to get the support for a CPO process at Manston Airport, and we've received the square root of very little.
I get that local politicians and national politicians have a genuine interest in generating the local economy and creating jobs, and I think that is entirely worthy and exactly what you want to do, and I recognise and accept that. If in an ideal world, given all of the complications that this situation involves, if somehow out of the ether a new proposal were to emerge to reinstitute a working viable airport at Manston, would you prefer that option over what's now planned?
Well, it depends on the scale of what was offered, but I've always suggested that if there were interesting, viable propositions that were good for the East Kent economy and good for aviation growth at Manston, I would look at it. And I'm sure the new owners would so do. But just to remind the committee that PricewaterhouseCoopers, acting on behalf of Infratil, were marketing this airport fairly aggressively. It wasn't too aggressive to begin with. I kept phoning them up, wanting to make sure that they did aggressively market Manston Airport globally to try and get interested parties to continue aviation at Manston. And that was peddled around the global aviation market. I did all that I could to try and encourage various parties to come forward when Infratil were getting very frustrated that no offers were coming their way, and there were various events that took place within the main board in New Zealand, which precipitated a very rapid sale at the time that Anne Clogue acquired the airport. The chairman of the company died unexpectedly over a very short period of time, and the rest of the directors then passed a resolution to offload the airport very rapidly and get it off their balance sheet. They've had enough.
Ms Lumley.
Can I just ask Councillor Johnson and Sir Roger, what would the people actually of your Thanet actually prefer, an airport or a business park?
I think the majority that contact me would prefer to have an airport. We're busily working on our draft local plan at the moment. We have found sites for the 12,000 homes we need by 2031 without needing Manston Airport. I have been committed since my last election to support the development of the airport. It's something I promised at election time. I keep that promise. And I think that the people, the majority, are concerned that the airport was lost and the way it was lost, want us to support its reopening, but there are concerns in the Ramsgate area about flights and night flights, etc. And I know from being in Ramsgate how low those planes go over the town. And if the airport was reinstated, we definitely would have to revisit the flight paths.
Sir Roger, what's your view of what should happen?
There is a small body of opinion, undoubtedly, that is opposed to the airport. It's a curious fact of life that people buy houses under the flight path and then are surprised to find that there are aircraft there. But that aside, and it is a small body of opinion, the overwhelming sense of opinion in East Kent, and my colleague Laura Sands and I are fully aware of this, is in favour of the airport, is opposed to other development, recognises the fact that there is a significant amount of underdeveloped and undeveloped brownfield industrial land available in Thanet already, that there is also housing land available already, that they want the jobs back in the short term that have been sacrificed. I think there's also a recognition, Mrs. Ellman, that it is a national asset. That was one of the points that I had made. It is a major diversion field, has been and should be. It's a resource that is unreplicated anywhere else, certainly in the southeast. It also has the capacity to house the search and rescue helicopters that used to be there and that Bristows want to bring back to cover the Straits of Dover. So it's not just a local interest, it is a county and a national interest as well, and there is huge support for it.
It has had... Order. Sir Roger, the airport has had varied success in the past, and that's perhaps putting it in a very mild way. What makes you think it could be successful in the future?
I've been a supporter of the airport from the very beginning. I was party to the deal with the MOD, which was led by Jonathan Aitken, who was the Member of Parliament at the time, in whose constituency Manston at that time was, to transfer a lease on the ownership, not the whole of the ownership, but a lease, to Seabourn Aviation, which was actually a cargo company. Clive Bourne wanted an aviation base to add to his cargo business, and that was the foundation of the origin. I think the business was then sidetracked down some extremely unfortunate, glamorous but unfortunate ventures into passenger traffic, which should have been the icing on the cake, but not the cake itself. The thing that has impressed me about the RiverOak proposal is their determination to recognise the value of a transport hub to serve Northern Europe, not just the United Kingdom, but also the Low Countries as well. There is a demand, and they believe that they can meet that demand. You've heard that they also believe that they can add not a step-toes backyard aircraft braking business of the kind that has been tried at Manston in the past, but a properly organised and much needed braking business, which will go somewhere if it doesn't go to Manston. And I think that that is the fundamental difference. They want to base their operation upon cargo and airport-related businesses, rather than solely looking for sunshine passenger holidays.
I mean, are you confident that that would be their intention if they became involved, and that they wouldn't be seeing this as another type of development opportunity?
I understand that's a concern. I have, apart from Mr. Freudman, who I had met before, I knew none of the RiverOak team until they came forward and expressed an interest prior, incidentally, to the closure of Manston. The £7 million offer was actually made before the airport closed, and that was the asking price. That was what Mrs. Globe had asked for. I met them on a number of occasions and have met them on many occasions since. I've been impressed by their determination. I actually thought they'd walk away. I thought when the airport was shut, they'd say, the hell with it, there are other places we can go, we don't need the hassle. They've stuck with this because I believe they want to do it. And the reason they want to do it is because they believe they can make money out of it. You heard Mr. Yerrell say that. This is a hard-nosed business approach. It's not anything particularly romantic. But it happens to suit a romantic purpose, which is for those of us who want to keep Manston open. I think they can do it. If I didn't, I wouldn't be sitting here now.
Thank you. Mr. Vickers.
Sir Roger, we heard from Councillor Johnston that the Thanet Council had spent £26,000, I think it was, on legal advice. You don't get a lot of legal advice for £26,000. And it is a big resource for a district council. I acknowledge that, and I can understand that the council would be mindful of wanting to minimise the expenditure. But do you think the advice they received both externally and internally was up to standard?
Brutally, no. I think it is understandable that a local council of the size and shape of Thanet, with the resources that it's got, hasn't got and cannot be expected to have officers who are expert in this kind of quite complicated deal. I know that RiverOak have spent large sums of money on lawyers and have bought very good legal advice. What I also know is that RiverOak have offered to put money. I sound as if I'm an agent for RiverOak. Madam, please understand I'm not. I will support anybody that wants to open Manston as an airport, as a viable and going concern. And RiverOak is the show in town. So if I appear to be representing them, it is only in that context. But they have offered to pay a sizable sum of money into an English bank account to meet the costs that have already been incurred by Thanet Council, the £26,000, plus any other costs that are incurred up to and through the compulsory purchase order process. And thereafter, and at that point, and only at that point, does any other liability cut in legally, and at that point, to then meet the purchase costs on a back-to-back deal. I honestly don't believe that anybody could be, any company, British, American, Australian, New Zealand, or anyone else could be asked to do more than that.
I think, Sir Roger, that like me, and as the local MP, you've probably seen this document about a proposed joint venture. Would that be correct?
Yes, I have a copy.
Yeah, and it includes some rather surprising comments, including one that says, given the adverse local reaction to the closure of the airport, the perception that the site is under the control of a non-controversial joint venture partner would be commercially advantageous from a planning perspective. I wonder if you could comment on that or anything else in the document.
On November, may I just expand that answer just a little to take in a tiny bit of background? I was telephoned on November the 30th, 2013, by Mrs. Globe personally, who told me in terms that she had acquired Manston Airport that she intended to invest heavily in it, that she was going to give it 2 years to see if she could make it work, and that she might need some assistance with night flying, not in terms of scheduled flights, but only in terms of unscheduled emergency flights that might become necessary through delay or whatever. I understood that Mrs. Gloag had a track record in transport, although not in aviation, and obviously I welcome the fact, not knowing any of the financial background at that time, I welcome the fact that the airport had been acquired by somebody who appeared to want to make it work. On January the 29th, 2014, heads of agreement were signed by Mrs. Bradley with a third party, offering the airport for sale in the sum of £8 million. That is 2 months into the ownership of the airport. And as you know, the airport was closed, the announcement was made on budget day. Mrs. Sands and I heard about it while we were sitting in the chamber on budget day. That was actually less than 4 months into the promised 2 years. I believe now that I was completely misled, that I was lied to, and that Mrs. Gloag had no intention whatsoever of running this as an airport and every intention of seeking to turn it into an asset-stripping property development. I was shown the document and I was completely taken aback by it. Source unknown, authorship believed to be Mrs. Bradley, as a briefing note prepared for Mrs. Gloag sometime in August of 2014. And it says in totally cynical terms the words that Mr. Vickers has read, and it spells out under another chapter precisely the terms that effectively were agreed between Messrs. Carton and Musgrave, Bradley and Gloag. I am deeply cynical about the way that the whole of this has been handled, and therefore about the people who've been party to the decision.
What would you like the Department for Transport to do? Do you see a role for now?
The Department for Transport, at the request of Downing Street, now have in their hands all of the RiverOak papers. I hope they've got all of them. I believe they have. And I hope that they've also now got all of the Thanet District Council papers. They are being reviewed. I would like the Department for Transport to say either that Thanet Council was right in its caution and that RiverOak need to provide more information if their bid, and it is still current, we're not talking in the past tense, they still want to buy the airport. If they have to provide more information, then they must do so. Or the Department for Transport must say that Thanet Council, while understandably, was nevertheless overcautious and can safely proceed with a compulsory purchase on a back-to-back deal with RiverOak. And the other thing I'd ask of this committee is, because I don't want to see this happen again, I feel very strongly, as I said in my submission, that national infrastructure is a national asset. Once it's gone, you don't get it back. And I recommended a sort of quasi-listing, rather like listed buildings, but not in the historical, archaeological, architectural sense, so that a site such as this could be protected up until the point where an inspector had looked at it and a Secretary of State had ruled, yes, this can properly be sold, or no, in the national interest, this should be protected. This is a site of national value. The Virgin aircraft that ran into trouble and shut Gatwick for half a day could have been diverted so easily to Manston 6 months ago, 9 months ago, had the airport still been open. The planes that are currently destined, potentially carrying terrorists, to Stansted, which would bring that airport to a grinding halt, could be diverted safely to not an airport like Manston, there isn't one, but Manston, with its long runway and its wide runway. I think assets like this have to be protected, and the reason that I asked, and I'm so grateful to the Select Committee for taking this on board, is because I think these are assets that, in the national interest, on a cross-party basis, we really have to try to protect.
Councillor Carter, did you indicate then?
Well, I mean, I'm not privy to the paper to which Sir Roger's referring, but I think, and perhaps David Smith could correct me if I am in any way wrong, that the offer of a JV 2 months into Anne Gloag's ownership, when the £8 million was mentioned, was with and connected to Mr. Freudman, who I think originally had potentially introduced the opportunity of both buying Manston and Prestwick Airport, which were both owned by Infratil. So Mr. Freudman's been very keen on getting some form of ownership or shareholding or interest in the airport over a long period of time, and indeed was connected in Wiggins' ownership many, many years ago. So I think that, you know, one needs clarity on that position of Mrs. Cloag potentially going into a joint venture with somebody, as I understand it, that was connected to Mr. Freud.
Thank you for coming. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. No, we're concluding the session now. If you wish to write into us, you can do. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next panel. Welcome to the Select Committee. Could we have your name and organisation, please?
No night flights.
Right, thank you.
Dr. Bo Webber, Save Manston Airport Group.
Thank you.
Angie Sutton, Why Not Manston Group.
Thank you. You've all heard the evidence from this afternoon. Are there any specific points you'd like to raise with us, that you'd like to challenge what you've heard or reinforce what you've heard? But I'd like to make brief statements, please. What would you like to say?
I organised the air show at Manston in 2013. It was extremely successful. I put a lot of pressure on Manston Skyport to tell me whether I could have an air show in 2014, because it takes quite a long time to organise. They did buy it on the 29th of November, as we've said, but I actually got a phone call on the 11th of January 2014 telling me I was definitely not going to have an air show. So in my mind, that definitely said they were closing it.
Mr. Webber?
Something I'd like to raise is the consultative process over the Manston Airport closing. SMA believe that the government prescribed closure consultation appears to be mainly implemented as an exercise of informing, primarily through the media. So Roger Gale has made the point that there should be a listing of regional airports as national assets. They should not then be susceptible to the whims of property developers to asset strip for personal or corporate gain. SMA would also very like to very strongly second RiverOak's call in their submission to the Commission for at least a one-year consultation period as and when there is a proposal to close an airport. The Manston closure consultation was announced on the very day government support was announced for the establishment of new air routes. Southend has already benefited. This could have been Manston. I would like to raise the matter of diversionary history of Manston.
Can you do it very briefly, please, because I want to move on to other questions. I just want to get very key points to make.
Manston is frequently fog-free when other airports are closed, nor is it frequently subject to the strong winds that Gatwick frequently suffers from. It has a long history of a diversionary airport, being the last of 3 deliberately extended World War II airports.
So you're agreeing with that? are you?
Sorry?
You're agreeing with that? Do you want to reinforce that?
I want to reinforce that it has an important diversion history and it should be put back as a diversionary airport.
Thank you. Ms McIntyre, what are the key points you'd like to make?
The key points is that Manston is a 15-year experiment in turning a World War I airfield into a 21st century commercial airport, and it's failed. In those 15 years, it has never made a profit. If you look at any of the company reports, we can send you data on that. It has never accounted for as much as 0.5% of the diversions. It has never counted for as much as 0.5% of UK's passengers or air traffic movements. Its strong suit was freight, and typically it's about 1 to 1.5% of UK's freight operation. It's a tiny airport that has never succeeded commercially.
And do you welcome the involvement of Mr Musgrave and Mr Cartner?
It's very hard to tell just as a member of the public, anybody's credibility in terms of what they promise. I think what is clear is that promises have been made by successive airport owners and by local politicians about the number of jobs that would be created at Manston. If we listened to Mr Freudman's estimates, we would now have 6,000 jobs at Manston and 450,000 tonnes of freight. It would be great to have somebody else try a different formula for producing jobs in Thanet, which is desperately needed.
Thank you. Mr Harris.
Ms McIntyre, your primary concern, if I'm right, is to campaign against the noise created by night flights at Manston, is that correct? You're raising economic arguments that support your view that it would be better if the airport wasn't there, but what is your priority? Is it the removal, perfectly understandable by the way, removal of the nuisance noise of night flights, or is it about the economy? For example, if the figures stacked up contrary to what you're suggesting, if there was a strong economic case for the airport, would you still oppose the airport because of the night flights, or does economics trump the noise of the night flights?
Economics carries considerable weight, but there isn't a viable proposition on the table. It's the same strategy that Wiggins pursued, freight first, and it's why Infratil bought the airport, freight first. So I think it was Sir Roger suggesting people disappeared down a passenger route. That came very late indeed. The challenge for us is this is an airport that has never had planning permission to be an airport. No environmental impact assessment has ever been done for it to be an airport. And it has a very unrestricted night flying programme in that you can land a 747 unscheduled at any time of day or night.
Has that happened very often?
It does happen, and noise levels in excess of 1,000 decibels are recorded on Ramsgate's houses.
You'll have guessed by my accent I'm not from Thanet. So can you tell me, are your views representative of the general population, or would you say it's 50-50? I genuinely don't know what the argument comes down to about the pro and the anti-airport. Is your view widely held, or are you admitting that you're a minority view?
I think the most honest answer anybody can give you is nobody knows. The last time this was tested in a public consultation, people came out 2-1 in favour of saying no to night flights, and that's the closest that we've had. Some of the numbers that have been suggested, that 98% of Kent is in favour of reopening Manston via a CPO. When tested, some of those figures come down to tiny samples of 50 interviews in a ward.
But
so I don't think anyone
being
knows.
Against night flights doesn't necessarily mean you're against the airport.
Well, no, and no night flights has consistently taken a pro-airport but anti-night flight stance. What worries us now is seeing the same business plan being suggested by RiverOak, which is cargo reliant, and cargo, we have always been consistently told by airport owners, must have night flights.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Webber, what do you think will happen or could happen to make Manston successful in the future?
I think the crucial point is we strongly support RiverOak because we feel they've been very open with us. We like their business plan. We like what they're proposing for flights. The crucial points are the cargo, and no, they don't want night flights. They're not a part of their schedule. The cargo flights, we know that Cargo Lux and others are keen to return. The other part of the aspect is the teardown, the maintenance, repair, overhaul facilities, where RiverOak, we believe, want to put in high-quality ISO standard hangars to do this work, as opposed to the present owners who are tearing down derelict planes that are on the site and damaging an £8 million, recently installed £8 million concrete apron in the process. It is not the way it should be done. We believe RiverOak have described the process the way it should be done. It will bring in money, it will cover the basic costs of the airport, and so the cargo flights, which can come in by about 2016, we believe, and passenger flights by 2017 will then become highly viable.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Webber, could you explain to us why you think Manston is a nationally important asset rather than merely a question for Kent or the South East?
Because it can do a substantial amount, and we don't say all the job, of another runway, certainly in the short term, for Gatwick and Heathrow. I mean, we're hearing I've been at a number of Gatwick meetings, and we hear they're talking about many, sometimes decades, to get that runway back a new runway up and running. Manston can be up and running within the year. It is crucial as both a diversionary airport and as a base for Bristow's helicopters. The busiest part of the busiest waters in the world are the Channel, English Channel, which is just within a mile of Manston, the Manston Airfield.
Ms. Sutton, yes. Please.
I spent 33 years as an air traffic controller, and a large part of that I was in charge of all emergencies in the air at the London Air Traffic Control Centre. So the diversionary part of it was my speciality. I retired to Margate, and when I was asked to come and talk to you today, I thought, well, there couldn't be anybody more perfectly placed to talk about diversions. We have used Manston many, many times. Logically, I have got military coming out of my ears, but we did check. There are many, many civilian aircraft that have used Manston as diversions. If Heathrow gets fogged in, if there is a problem on any one of the runways, and of course Gatwick only has one, Manston is the instant diversion. It has the capability of coping with anything. Many years ago, they even had 70 aircraft divert in a week there. That will happen again, it would be utilised. And the other thing is, although we don't use it very often, Stansted is the one if you have a problem with a hijack aircraft. And it just destroys Stansted. It brings it to a halt totally. With Manston, we've got enough space to get it out of the way, to get it into corners, to surround it almost, and to be able to actually deal with it properly. And it's that sort of thing that is missed. It's the fact that it's got things like what are the best equestrian facilities to put horses through there. It's got cold storage. It's got so much to offer, both nationally and internationally, because we're so close to Dover, we're so close to Folkestone for Eurotunnel and everything. So it is absolutely essential that we have that airfield.
So going on from that very full list, and I'm very pleased you've given that onto the record, why has it not been possible to operate Manston commercially? And if it is so important to operate Manston for all those reasons, how, in your view, should that be done?
I think when they first started, when they took it over from the MOD, I was one of the controllers that used to control all the light aircraft out of Manston going north up to Edinburgh. And what they were doing, they were trying to cut corners but using huge aircraft. So these aircraft were sort of like 120 passengers when really they needed smaller ones to do jumps. The other thing is, when we actually brought in the KLM flights, that actually was starting to take off. To get to Heathrow and to get on an aircraft, for me to fly to America, takes me over 2 hours to get to Heathrow. That's if the M25's been very nice to me. I then have to check in 3 hours, and then I have to walk for miles with my kids to actually get on an aircraft. For me, I could get to Manston, and don't get me wrong, I do live close to Manston, but this applies to quite a lot of people. I could get there within 10 minutes. We had an hour's check-in, absolutely maximum. We then flew to Schiphol in 55 minutes. So I was in Schiphol before I'd even arrived at Heathrow. And that's the bit that is missed. But as they said, that is the icing on the cake. It's not the cake. The cake is these cargoes that can be utilised fully. People are supporting the idea. You cannot get a 747 turned round at Heathrow in 90 minutes. It's just impossible. And yet Manston used to do it day in, day out.
Would either Ms McIntyre or Dr Webber like to add anything on those questions?
I would. Unfortunately, the numbers that are being quoted here don't seem to match what's in the CAA statistics. So the CAA statistics, and we can send you this, 0.5%, so 7-10 diversions a year, and in many years no diversions whatsoever. The KLM flights peaked a few months in and then were starting to slowly tail off, and at no point did they reach more than 44.4% of capacity. Those are statistics, those are on the government's own website at the CAA, and at that point, of course, that's not a profit-making flight. So I do accept it's very tempting to say we could take all these airlines from other airports and put them through Manston. That airlines have had 15 years to choose to do that, and they haven't because that's not where they want to be.
Can I dispute some of these figures? For a start, the CEO at Manston apparently says on his website that Manston had reached number 5 in the UK for cargo transport while he was running the show. Secondly, the CAA site says that in the year it was operating, before it was told to leave, KLM carried 50,000 passengers. Thirdly, we believe, we will note that in 2005, from 1999 to 2005, Pauline Bradley was joint ventures at Bank of Scotland and was loaning money to Manston and airports and airlines using it. We note that they shortly afterwards, receiving this money, they went bust. We note that Pauline Bradley is the present director of Manston Airport. SMA believe that since at least 2005 there's been a continuous process to trash Manston, to run it down, to prove that it could only be viable for housing.
Thank you, Dr Webber. I'm happy to hand back to the chair.
What could Manston offer that other small airports in the southeast, say Lydd, couldn't?
The length of that runway is phenomenal. Lydd, even with its extension, with £25 million put in there, cannot take those sort of aircraft. Even though it's not the longest in the country by any stretch of the imagination, it is about the 11th, even though it's been 2nd, 3rd, 4th, it's going down. Lydd can't cope with that. Southend can't cope with that. And the other thing is, when you say that there is another little bit, you could use it for light aircraft, which is done brilliantly. General Aviation puts in millions and millions of pounds into the economy, both local and nationally, and that is very well recognised. When you've got 61-metre wide runway, it allows for mistakes on people who can't fly very well, even though that sounds a little bit dangerous. But it does mean it is extremely beneficial for general aviation in all forms.
I'd like to thank... do you want to add something?
I will just add that that 61-metre wide runway is only the central section. Either side of that, there are large areas which are presently mainly used for taxiway, but if you are landing a plane where the control surfaces are giving problems, the undercarriage is shot to pieces, that width is wonderful.
you. Well, thank you very much for coming and answering our questions so fully. Thank you. Order, order.